They will be providing the translation. So let us begin with our conference. The title is, well, it's about the Israeli-Palestinian issue or situation, which, as you know, is of great interest for the Fondazione Basso. It has always taken an interest in it ever since it was founded. And today, if we look at what is happening, this issue, together with the tragedy of the war in Syria, it is more than ever before the most tragically emblematic situation of the crisis of international law and of its institutions. And with the United Nations, first and foremost. And this crisis has been made increasingly alarming because of the unilateral approach taken by the President of the US, Mr. Trump, and by the Israeli government. They continue to ignore human rights and international law, and they go on ignoring the tens of resolutions that have been adopted since 1967 by the General Assembly and the Security Council of the United Nations. And not only did they abstain, but the United States expressed their support in favor of certain measures. And next, on the 14th of March, will be the 70th year that marks the 70th year of Israel, the State of Israel. Well, the U.S. Embassy ignores most of the resolutions of the United Nations that go against the resolutions of the holy town of Jerusalem, something that, well, on the 15th is another tragic anniversary for the Palestinians who, and this has been pre-announced, they will be holding a demonstration in Jerusalem. So what we would like to highlight is what European governments should do. The Italian government, the EU Commission, for instance. The EU appears to be incapable of intervening in order to alleviate the suffering of the people living in the occupied territories, and also it appears to be incapable of adopting some sort of initiative that may curb the economic aid to Israel in order to bring them into to make them aware that they should be complying with human rights. So there's an interesting resolution that was approved in March 2017, consistently with what was stated in Resolution 2334 of 2016 of the UN Security Council. Well, it states that Israel's new settlements in Palestinian territory, which started back in 1967, including also eastern Jerusalem, all of this is deprived of any legal foundation, and it is an open violation of international law. The resolution condemns the continuation of this policy of new settlements being set up all the time, and it condemns the decision to start new settlements and tenders for the construction of 2,000 homes, and of declaring other areas of the Gaza Strip as being state territory. And they will be demolishing houses that were built with the funds from the EU. And this will lead to the displacement, the forced displacement of Palestinian families and confiscation of their property. Well, the resolution approved on the 19th of April 2018 has to do with the Gaza Strip. This resolution states that if we consider the data of the United Nations, according to these data, 1.3 million people in the Gaza Strip need humanitarian assistance. 47% of these families suffer from lack of food, either severe or moderate severe food, and 97% don't have drinking water or water that is suited for human consumption, and 80% don't have the energy needs that they have, and more than 40% of the people are out of a job, have no jobs. And Israeli defense forces have often fired on demonstrators using active bullets. And on the 30th of March, on the 6th and 13th of April 2018, 30 Palestinians were killed and more than 2,000 people were injured, amongst whom many children and women. Now, these resolutions are rather important from the political, at the political level and in terms of principles. But it seems that they seem to be ambivalent and even ambiguous because they are affected by that choice of wanting to keep the two sides to the conflict on the same level. And they do, however, they do not change the tragic reality that instead could be influenced if political and economic action or concrete political and economic action were to be taken by the European Union. Of course, we do not ignore or overlook the need to stop all forms of violence by all sides, even by the Palestinians, because causing death and damage, albeit to a much smaller number of victims by the Palestinians, and even the loss of one human life is unacceptable. And from this standpoint, we launch our strong appeal also to the Palestinians. However, it is self-evident that there is an evident skewedness, there is an imbalance of forces, there is a disproportionate amount of violence that is being exercised. And it is decades now that there is a situation of occupation that is encroaching on the Palestinian territory. Well, all this openly and blatantly ignores the rights or law and the rights of individuals and peoples. It ignores the declarations of the United Nations, but no international action is taken to stop this state of affairs. Now, the Fondazione Basso and the AssoPacePalestina, together with the Casa della Pace, the House of Peace, have listened to these calls for peace, and therefore we are taking a political and cultural initiative. Now, we do not want to restrict ourselves only to crying out against the violation of the people's rights and the rights of the Arab citizens by the Israeli government. And so we have embarked on this program with 3 conferences, a series of 3 conferences, and today is the first one, which are brought about thanks to the contribution of the municipal administration of Monterotondo and the hospitality of Casa della Pace, the House of Peace, Nello Rossi. And so we will be having another meeting at the end of June and the third after the summer in September or October. The aim is that of gathering first-hand information, as you have seen from the program, where we see 4 Israeli citizens, of whom one is an Arab, and they will be interacting with Italian scholars. They will be providing information about the politics of the State of Israel with regard to the evolution or involution of the rule of law, and with regard to the cultural and social changes that are occurring in the Israeli society, with reference also to the way the minorities are treated. The second meeting will pursue the same goals, but it will be focusing on the Palestinian society. And it is on the basis of these meetings, on the basis of the information that we will be gathering, it is on the basis of this that we will give voice to the aspects of the political instability and the problems caused by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that this situation may generate new conflicts. And on the other hand, we want to contribute to raising the awareness of public opinion with regard to the absolute need for the European Union to take an initiative, and obviously also the Italian government, initiative in order to put an end to the international violations, the violations of human rights and of international law, so that the Union, the EU, may become a major player in the building up of peace and in ensuring that rights be complied with. So we as Democrats are worried because the persistence of this situation may, even in Israel, cause a process of change in the Israeli state, the state that proudly defined itself as being the sole democracy in the Mediterranean, and that today instead is characterized by theocratic tendencies and by being against the ethnic minorities, and all this would undermine the rule of law and the equal dignity of peoples and individuals without distinction, without religious, gender, opinion distinctions, or social standing, and so on. So this is a concern that derives from the facts that are occurring, and also as a result of our history. We are the heirs of Basso, who, in the Italian Constituent Assembly, was responsible for Article 3, and in particular the paragraph or the formulation of the principle on equality that is the basis for substantial equality, and he was also one of the promoters of the proclamation of the Charter of Human Rights in Algiers back in 1976. So there's also an open letter that was recently signed by 32 leading personalities of the Jewish world, first and foremost Bruno Segre, who takes a stance which is the direct opposite of anti-Semitism, which is claimed in order to reject any criticism made against the Israeli state. But our initiative, just like the initiative of the 32 signatories of that open letter, are the result of respect for history and the desire to reinstate the legality of international law and the rights and respecting the rights of every human being. And this is how we're beginning this conference. At this point, I would pass the floor, in accordance with our program, I would pass the floor to Avram Berg, who, for those of you who are well acquainted with these issues, well, he doesn't need to be introduced. He is well known to you all. He is the author of the famous book, which was a major success also in Italy, a publishing exec, on killing Hitler, and he was the former president of the European Parliament. Speaker of the Knesset, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, that's an expression of hope. So he was the Speaker of the Knesset. And so we wanted him to be the first amongst our very famous invitees to take the floor first and speak to us about the situation. invitees to take the floor first and speak to us about the situation.
Thank you very much for your very detailed introduction. I listened to your description of me as a potential president of the European Union, and knowing the expansionist motivations of my government, I'm afraid that they will come and somebody will adopt it as a recommendation for policy to have Europe under the Israeli dominance. So please don't repeat it outside of this room, okay? Yeah, I said, please. Luisa, that's the fourth session, not this one, okay? I'm very grateful, and I would like to share my thanks and gratitudes to the Fondazione Basso, to Luisa, which is unlimited energizer, never stop, never gives up, never stop chasing us to do something good. I mean, I'm really grateful on behalf of many, Luisa, to everything you did in the past, and much more than that for everything you are going to do in the future. And I would like to use this opportunity to express a very personal, emotional thanks to three people here among us, which is Hagai to my left, Nurit next to Luisa, and Jafar down there, who are my civil heroes. These are the people who make the Israeli sometimes difficult to bury. I will never say unbearable because we bear it, but sometimes difficult to bury life possible by their courage, activism, creativity, and devotion. So thank you very, very much for everything you represent in my personal life, but in the life of us as a collective. I love the process which was suggested by you, which is 3 stages process. Usually, those of us who are veterans of the peace industry, we know what's the dynamic of a session like this. You have a mixed group, very balanced between men and women, Israelis and Palestinians, inside and outside, local and diaspora. Everything is balanced. All the political correct checks are checked. And then we start the process. All the Palestinians, severely and rightly so, criticize the state of Israel. And then the Israelis take over and criticize the state of Israel. So by the end of the process, did I already say something wrong? No. Not yet? Okay. So by the end of the process, we find ourselves in a quite balanced situation that all sides criticized one side. The way you offer it now, which is a deep soul-searching look into the Israeli reality by Israelis and a deep soul-searching insight into the Palestinian side, regardless of what happens outside of it, and then merge the two together into the third part, looks to me as original, creative, and has a lot of potential. So I'm very, very happy about it, and I would like, with your permission in my introduction, to share with you some of the thoughts I have inside about the situations, not so much about the details that you can read at the headlines or can watch at the TV or even have at the social media exchanges between us and us, but some thought of somebody who had the privilege to be inside and now has the privilege to be next to the inside, but with a different point of view. As for now, there is no peace and there is no peace process. And by the way, we will not discuss it now, but peace and peace process are not the same thing. Peace is an existential reality. Peace process is entertainment. I mean, you never want to achieve it. You just want to process it and process it and process it and come and go and publish and leak and accept and reject and be in the game, but never to achieve it. So we neither have a goal of peace, neither do we have a process towards whatever it is. We are living in a kind of a very neutral point in which despair is not a real program. We don't like it, but we don't have anything to do out of it. And optimism is not yet applicable, or not anymore applicable. So we're in a twilight between despair and hope, between no process and no peace. And where are we exactly? Not really known. Does it work? Does it not work? Does it have any kind of a potential? Nobody really knows. So at this not really knowing, where are we, I have a feeling that it's a moment of, has a potential to be a moment of to sober up, to wake up, to look at previous paradigms and dogmas maybe with a different eye, maybe to develop an alternative approach because the previous one didn't work. So let's begin with my own very close and intimate political camp, the left in Israel, or if you want me to be more accurate, whatever is left of the left, which is nothing. For many years, and I feel very guilty about it, for many years, I was the fig leaf. Me and my friends, we were the fig leaf covering the testicles of the Israeli occupation industry. At what sense? I traveled extensively around the world. I enjoyed every visit to Italy. I enjoyed every trip to the EU. I loved it. I went and said, don't worry, there is hope. We are activists. We're about this, about that. And everything was about next week. Next week, Trump is coming. Next week, Clinton is coming. Next week, Arafat is going to talk. Next week, Biden is going to meet Abu Mazen. Everything was about next week. It was 50 years of next week policy. And every weekend like this, we said, okay, this weekend it didn't work, next weekend. And we worked on very short-term hopes. And at the time in which we kept the possibility of this temporary transition period of occupation just lasting till last week, and the other side, the settlers and their supporters created solid facts on the ground. We were about temporary philosophies and they were about real estate. And by the end of it, we are stuck with, they have the real estate and I'm not ready to travel around the world anymore and say it's temporarily. So this is part of the guilt of the left in Israel that was, from my point of view, the occupation laundry machine. I go onwards. It's not my role and it's not this session now, but there is a feeling, and I'm a one who spends a day every 2 weeks in Ramallah, that as much as the contemporary Palestinian leader is the best of Palestinian peace camp over there, he does not, as for now, has the power to lead the entire Palestinian people into something wider than the status quo. It is good at preserving the status quo. I do not see a breakthrough towards a more exciting Oslo-like euphoria. Not now. The Arab states around us, as hypocritic as they were all during the last 70 years, and sometimes cynically using the Palestinian suffering for their own internal politics, even they are not there anymore. The Palestinian issue looks as if does not seriously engages or interest the traditional classical Arab players, be it Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and some others. It is not there anymore. The Arab states are not there. They have other issues. Europe is well into its own problems, and the United States of America is crazy. So when you take all of these components together, no real opposition alternative in Israel, no comprehensive leadership at the Palestinian side like Yasser Arafat was, as difficult and challenging as he was. No Arab state to be the infrastructure or the foundation for a more comprehensive geopolitical arrangement. Europe where it is and America what it became, it's an interesting point. I won't say more than interesting point, but let's not assume that we can exercise and implement philosophies of the 70s, of some of us, who became the politics of the 90s by some of us, the two-state solution may be hinted to by Oslo, that we can implement it as if nothing happened by the end of the second decade of the 21st century. That's a mistake. We need something new, something which addresses the current state of affairs. So what are the parameters of the paradigmatic change? Not what is the paradigmatic change itself, but what's around it. The first is, I feel that maybe the fact that the Palestinian issue is a little bit off the central stage is a problem, but it's an opportunity as well. Maybe when you have to perform every night at the main stage and the eyes of the entire world is on you, does not leave you a room for mistakes or a room for reconsidering or to take off time. And maybe the fact that the issue is a little bit off the main stage of the international theater might help some of us to develop a more or a less stressful approach. The second is, it looks as if that around us there is a map of interest which is bigger than the conflict itself. We must address it somehow. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Russia, America, Israel, Europe, we must see where this conflict now fits into the new geopolitical reality. There are some opportunities, there are some obstacles. I'll show you an illustration of an opportunity. I don't know if it is there. Imagine that we could have had a minute of Donald Trump's psyche. I don't wish it to anybody, but imagine, you know, theoretically speaking, I'm the deal maker. I'm the ultimate deal maker. Can we sell him the idea, listen, go to Israel and tell them, I gave you Iran, I gave you the embassy, give me Palestine. Is it possible to talk this talk? Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but at least we have to explore it one way or another. And then comes a very interesting internal paradigmatic change. If you read very carefully the lines and between the lines of the ideological discourse in Israel, you realize a potential of a very interesting new coalition. Elements of the left, myself included, and elements of the right, President Rivlin included, and elements at the Palestinian state are ready to explore something that was unexplorable up until recently. Not a two-state solution, but a one-state solution. It's a threat, but it's an opportunity. It's a change, but it has some potential. And if we do not explore it, we will never have this new paradigm. And when we speak about this new paradigm, paradigms are usually having psychologies. It's usually psychopolitics before the politics. The psychopolitics of the region today is, I have a feeling that major part, substantial major part of the Arab politics around us in the region and around us within the region take Israel as a fact that is not going to disappear. Unlike what was the feeling in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and even at early 90s. It's a fact which is not going to disappear. And on the other hand, most of the Zionist philosophies today realize that the ancient end of 19th century colonialist philosophy, that here is a people with no land, the Jews, coming to a land with no people, was a deception. Yes, there is another people there, and we have to address it in means which are not war only. And in a very interesting way, we don't pay attention to it, the right in Israel is having today at least 7 different programs or plans for the future of the relations. The left still has Oslo. But something is moving there. And then it brings me to the question of what happens within Israel. Israel of 48 and Israel of the occupied territories is a very interesting splitted personality in the following way. From 48 up until today, we invest a lot of energy I'm not proud of it, I just look at it to make sure that every previous reminder of the previous history of the place, the Palestinian history, will be eradicated, erased, ignored, forgotten. We have an industry of making forget. Names of villages, presence of ancient presence, archaeology, roads, routes, names of streets, individuals. Forget about them. And at the same time, we're not ready to relinquish the occupied territories of 67 and on, which is a permanent reminder there is a Palestinian issue. So on one hemisphere of our mind, we want to forget it all and invest a lot into forgetting. And with the other hemisphere, we invest a lot in order to remember. So the Palestinian thing in the eyes and in the psyche of the Israeli is both about absolute remembering and a total forgetting. If this leads to some kind of psychological crisis, don't blame me, okay? But this is where we are, psychologically speaking, unstable. The second thing is, it leads to a political reality. In a very, I will not say cynical, but in a very interesting way, 67 was the salvation of the left in Israel. In what sense? Israel and Palestine are having serious problems of 48. This is when most of the problem was created. Now, I'm not a one who will come to any strategic thinking or any political one and say, let's correct yesterday's wrongs by creating new wrongs. But I say, let's realize, let's identify, let's recognize, let's accept it. So the real conversation between Israel and Palestine is 48. All of a sudden, Deus ex machina, 67 in 6 days came into our life, and we, the left, could say, let's have a deal. We give you 67, you forget about 48. And for years, the policy of the left was solve the occupied territories of 67 and not really addressing the 48 problems. Now, the more we fail about the two-state solution along the lines of 67, the more we are pushed to address the original primary scene, which is 48. So politically speaking, the less we are into the two-state solution, the closer we are to the origins and the roots of the problem, and therefore, dialectically speaking, maybe we are closer to a more comprehensive and deep solution, as difficult as it is. Now, I have to apologize to my Palestinian friends that some of the things that I'm going to mention now are coming from the point of view of the privileged. I'm privileged. I was born into a generation of my history, of my people's history, which is the best generation in our history. We have independence, we have power, we have capabilities, we have national pride, we have it all. I'm so much confident in the new Israeli being, or the new Jewish being, that I have no problem to give up some or even a lot, and in some theoretical vision in the future, all of my nationalistic definitions. And I come to my Palestinian friends after I have 70 years of a beautiful, ugly relations with my national definition and say, I'm ready to give it up after 70 years of experience. Are you ready to give it up even though you didn't have even 7 minutes of independence? Not fair. It's not fair. But what I'm going to say now, it is not about fairness of the political game, it's a point of view of an analysis. It's not a point of view of emotions, it's a point of view of the logic. Later on, we have to flesh it up with some emotions and to see how we create a future narrative which contains respectfully past narratives which are so contradicting and so much colliding into each other. And I say as follows. The first is, this is maybe for the third session of yours. First is, we must all of those who want to have peace move from a temporary state of mind into a long-term planning strategy. Imagine we are now in July 67. And I come to you and I said, tell me, this issue of the occupied territories, how long do you think can it continue? I mean, tell me, give me an appreciation, evaluation of time. Some will say 3 months. Others will say, you know what, 6 months. The most generous will say next year we are out of the occupied territories. Fast forward into 2018, we are 50 years into it, and we don't yet see the end. So I say, instead of wasting the next 30, 40 years for short-term formulas, let's think in terms of 50 years again. What do we see 50 years down the road? The first is, there is a very powerful force standing against us. It's international. That's the rise of conservatism. It's the rise of nationalism and neo-nationalism. It's the rise of ethnicity and racism. Whatever you visit, you feel over here, we experience over there. No real difference. But when it is implemented and exercised towards the occupation and the miseries of the Palestinian people, it becomes very unpleasant, to say the least. But this power is also a weakness. Like so many times in the concept of powers, what looks omnipotent is sometimes a potential for impotence. And I'll show you how. I'll give you just one example, Jerusalem. You say Jerusalem, you said it all. Now, every political Israeli, from prime minister and left, is taking daily 2 vows. The first vow is two-state solution. Even Prime Minister Netanyahu said it. I heard it with my own very ears without my hearing aid. At least rhetorically he said it. So it's two-state solution. And on the other hand, every Israeli is taking a vow about the undivided, united Jerusalem forever, never to be compromised. All of these lines. So it is united Jerusalem and a two-state solution. Now, this is an illusion, because if it is a two-state solution, it means the other state is Palestine, and it means the capital of the other state is Jerusalem. So if the capital of the other state of Jerusalem, Jerusalem is about to be divided. So if it is united Jerusalem, never to be divided, it's a one-state solution. If it is a two-state solution, Jerusalem is about to be divided. But not for long, you can contain this oxymoron. So yes, it looks as a very powerful 2 vows. Yes, we want peace, and yes, we want the two-state solution, the one Jerusalem. And I said, let's go between them in the cracks and divide it. I dream about a moment in which a jointed Jewish and Palestinian list will run under a Palestinian candidate to the mayorship of Jerusalem. Let's see you right-wingers. Let's see you. You want one Jerusalem? I want to see 40% of its population in the municipal council. Let's see what does that mean to you. I want to see what does this do to the political equations in Palestine, in Israel, and in East Jerusalem, which is a third entity, so to say. So the point of weakness, the point of strength is also the point of weakness. And the second is, I think we must move into a conscientious, different approach. Maybe the two-state solution was the best formula for the 90s, for the 80s, for the 70s. I do not know. But as for now, the competition is not between a product called two-state solution that never expires and some bad other nightmares. The days of the two-state solution formula are numbered if it did not expire already. And what we have today is a one-state formula with 2 different regimes. One state between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, which is the state of Israel, which exercises and implements 2 different regimes. One full of privileges to the Jews, and one full of discrimination to the Palestinians. So the way to counter it is not to say I want a division and partition and the continuity of discrimination via a different political structure. No. The way is one state bad solution to a one state good solution, which means two people living alongside each other and sharing the space and the political apparatus. It requires only one basic change. All the rest will follow through. That between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, the paradigm again will not be paradigm of separation and therefore ignoring and therefore discriminating, but will be a paradigm of sharing and respecting, which means between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, every individual and therefore every collective of individuals will have the right for the same rights. The minute the foundation of the conversation is, regardless what you are, a man or a woman, observant or non-observant, a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, Palestinian or an Israeli, as a human being, you have the right for the same rights. The whole conversation is a different conversation. One side, mine, the privileged one, has to relinquish some, if not a lot, of its absolute privileges. And the other side, the Palestinian one, has to get ready to participate and to share the space with the other neighbor. Rights and sharing with no partition should be the basic elements or the basic foundations for the new working assumption. When I try to wrap it all together, I will say we're not living in a good time, but I'm not necessarily so desperate. We used to ask my mom, "Mom, what are you? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?" And she said, "Me? Of course I'm an optimist. Today is much better than tomorrow." Now, I'm not this kind of an optimist. I really believe that in every given moment, the responsibility of the activist is to create options into the reality. So I wanted other options in the past. I cannot use them today. The situation changed, so I'm not about to sit and to mourn the past. I'm about to think about the new future and try to produce new options. And the whole political analysis of what is, the title of the place, critical analysis of the situation, comes at least, I believe, from me and people like me, yes, with a lot of pain, but with a lot of responsibility. We are the people who do not run away, who do not give up, who are ready to fight despite the fact that sometimes it's not very pleasant, because we believe that eventually, when the reality will turn and the pendulum will come back our direction, that will be the expression of the collective good for all of us, rather than a sectorial, patronizing good for one only. Thank you very much.
Ringraziamo molto.
We'd like to thank very much Abraham Burg. As you heard, we choose to open this session with his presentation. Was a very appropriate choice that we have made, and that we're all called upon to look into what the actual situation is on the ground, look at the options which are before us today, so that we can convert into reality what is culturally and politically possible today. So I think that his realistic approach is not sort of supported by the optimism of willpower, but the concrete possibility of changing paradigm. And this is definitely an invitation, a strong invitation to all of us to think about this possibility. We now give the floor to HagaiEl-Ad, who's the director of the Israeli Center for Human Rights, B'Tselem. You have the floor, Guy.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for the organizers for initiating this. Thank you all for being here this morning, spending the day thinking and discussing this issue together. And I want to express my personal gratitude and admiration to Louisa for taking such good personal care of me during recent days. I don't know how many of you had the pleasure and also the challenge of trying to walk in Rome together with Louisa, but it's a very difficult task because people keep stopping her every 5 minutes because she runs into yet another person that loves her, admires her, and so on. So it takes a very long time to get from here to there, and yet somehow she succeeds in doing it on time. I'm speaking in English, which is not my first language, and many of us are listening to translation. And when I was studying English, I ran into this issue that maybe others here that have learned English have also been confronted with, which is the complication of tenses. Too many tenses in English. Present progressive, future perfect, past present, all these things. The past not really that present, and the future not that progressive, but and so very, very complicated. I always keep making mistakes in my usage of English tenses in this way. And I think that maybe, just maybe, this is not just my own personal problem, but a challenge that more people perhaps are dealing with and not dealing with that well. In what sense? In the sense that we keep asking ourselves all sorts of questions with regard to the reality in Israel-Palestine. And we ask these questions all the time using the future tense, right? There's a list of questions. I'm sure you're all familiar with at least some of them. What will we do if the occupation becomes permanent? What will we do if there's going to be formal annexation? What will we do if Israel stops being a democracy? What will we do if Palestinians in Gaza will march to the fence? What will we do if there won't be negotiations for 2 states? And so on and so forth. And of course, this list of questions also comes with this expectation for a formal announcement that someone will do us the courtesy of showing up one day with a very big sign and will tell us very kindly, that thing that you were asking about, that you were concerned about, that day that you think you were asking when it will come, actually it has arrived. Right? There will be a formal announcement, like this is the day that paradigm has expired. This is the day that occupation has become permanent, and so on and so forth. And what I want to suggest is that first, our usage of future tense, English future tense, in this fashion is not just a grammatical error, but in fact a factual error, simply a factual error. And all of these things have arrived. I'm not sure exactly when, at what exact moment between 1967 and this morning they have arrived, but they have arrived. And I guess also, as you've noticed, there was no official announcement of that specific moment. And of course, the absence of that official announcement is part of the strategy, part of the way that we have managed to get to this unfortunate reality which we are living under, and if I would speak more precisely, with which Palestinians are living under. So just a few examples. What will we do if the occupation becomes permanent, right? So, I mean, if you were a less gentler, a less kinder audience, then you might have started laughing at this point, because this is really not a very intelligent question to ask. 50 years doesn't strike normal people as temporary, right? So I don't know exactly at what point, like in anyone's personal relationships or whatever, you would think that something has become permanent, but I suspect that 100% of the people in this room would agree that at some point between 0 and 50 years, things stop being temporary. So again, I don't know what was the moment of formality in which temporariness has completely expired in the context of this reality, but we are way past that point by this moment. What will we do if Israel stops being a democracy? Well, a democracy is a reality in which all people that are under the authority of a state have a political voice and are part of the political process, part of the decision-making process. That's one of the attributes of democracy. It's not all of it, but that's an essential part of democracy. Of course, without representation, without political rights, there is no reason for any person of good faith to expect rule of law, to expect justice, to expect equality, to expect meaningful realizations of basic human rights. But in my country, we are already, for half a century, living a reality in which there are 13 million people, everyone between the river and the sea, are living under one form or another of Israeli control, whether you are in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Jerusalem or inside the Green Line in Israel proper. All of us, all 13 million of us, are living under one form or another of Israeli control, and yet only a fraction of us, about 8 million of us, who are Israeli citizens like myself, have political rights, participate in the political process, go to elections, vote, and decide on the future. And when we decide on the future, we decide not only on our future, but also on the future of Palestinians, repeatedly making these decisions, one election cycle after another, above their heads. And that is deeply, fundamentally undemocratic. And that is not a temporary reality as well. Most election cycles in Israel, most of them, since my country was founded in 1948, actually happened with this part of reality, 50 out of 70 years, approximately. So if you're asking yourself, following the news of, recent pieces of what's been known as anti-democratic legislation, shrinking space for civil society in Israel, and so on, and critiquing that and expressing, I think, rightful concern with regard to what does that mean with regard to Israeli democracy, then I embrace the questions, but I reject the last part of the sentence, because there is no such thing. Israel has not been a democracy already for a very long time, and again, not because the treatment of civil society organizations is becoming more hostile, more like Russia, more like Egypt, more like Hungary in recent years, but because of the fundamental issue of the denial of political rights for millions of people living under occupation for more than half a century already. And of course, what will we do if Palestinians will march to defense? Well, Palestinians have been doing exactly that every Friday since March 30. And you see what, you have a non-theoretical answer to that. They are met with live bullets. And by this point in time, there are not only dozens of fatalities in Gaza in response by Israel to these demonstrations, but more than 2,000 people, let that sink in, more than 2,000 Palestinians that have been shot by live ammunition, by Israeli soldiers from inside Israel firing into the blockaded Gaza Strip. More than 2,000 people. And what will we do if there will be formal annexation? Well, the way Israel treats Area C, that 60% of the West Bank that was temporarily agreed upon in Oslo that will remain under Israeli control for 5 years and then actually stayed in that way for more than a generation, Israel already treats all of Area C as if it is absolutely ours. We already do whatever we want in Area C without formal annexation. So why are we so obsessed or ignoring the reality of what is actually happening on the ground de facto, day in and day out, with the excuse that in the absence of formal annexation, what is happening is actually acceptable, digestible, less horrific in some way? Why is there the denial of reality? Because that formal announcement hasn't arrived yet. So, as I was saying before, the fact that there was no formal announcement is not a coincidence. The strategy, Israeli strategy of trying to get to this point is a strategy that is aimed to always fly 2 inches below the level of international outrage. So you're always trying to identify how far and how fast you can go, but not pushing it too much too soon. And formal announcements actually might bring consequences. That's a good reason to continue just doing things de facto and not going through these formal announcements. That's good reason to occasionally pay the lip service for the two-state solution, because that also pushes against consequences, even though reality actually is continuing to go in the opposite direction. So what is needed in order for this reality to perpetuate itself is to successfully have it both ways, accomplish 2 things at the same time: perpetual occupation on the one hand, and no international consequences at the same time. And the way to accomplish that is through avoiding unnecessary official announcements of things that have already happened, in fact, in reality, but we are still somehow in partial denial with regard to them. It means that you do things gradually, you do things piecemeal, you do things 1 step at a time so that you don't get too much bad public relations, that you don't cross that level that might bring about international outrage. And you do things in a way that is always paying attention to providing a guise of legality to what we're doing to Palestinians. And that's also one of the unique aspects of Israel's oppression of Palestinians, that close attention to the letter of the law. Which means that you don't just send in the bulldozers. It means that before you do it, you actually cross the T's and dot the I's and allow Palestinians due process. And since we are the occupying power, we have almost all the patience in the world to let these things drag on for longer and longer and longer and longer, while on the other side, on the receiving end, what there are human beings, individuals, families, communities, often left to struggle on their own in the face of this enormous power of my country. And if you're not convinced to give up after a week, then maybe you will be convinced to give up after a month. And if not after a month, then after a year. Not after a year, after a decade, and so on and so forth. We've already had a very long time. Imagine, again, half a century already of applying that continuous pressure over Palestinians so that we can gradually accomplish what we desire. And that is mostly expressing itself in the context of building settlements on the one hand and displacing Palestinians on the other hand. And these 2 motions of our advancing and their retreat always go hand in hand, and are being pursued in a very steadfast and strategic and coherent fashion for a very long time, and the results are all in front of our eyes. Just look at the recent maps of the West Bank, look at the situation developing in East Jerusalem, and you will see how far we've actually succeeded in accomplishing this goal that clearly has been internationally acceptable, because withstanding all of the statements of rejection, concern, condemnation, and so on, at the end of the day, reality is what we have. And clearly, the world is accepting it. Otherwise, we would not have been here. And of course, this also has consequences with regard to international law. Now, I don't want to express the issue in the sense that, I'm not here as an international law expert, and my issue is not a theoretical commitment to international law. My issue is the realization of the rights of Palestinians and ending the occupation. But since all this is happening in a very well-known international context, then I think it is worth at least dedicating one paragraph to that issue. Israel is not the worst violator of human rights around the world, but Israel is uniquely positioned to cause harm to international law in ways in which other regimes are unable to do. In what way? Other countries that violate rights in ways much worse than what Israel does don't even bother to pretend that they're in compliance with international law in any way. And even if they would, no one would take them seriously, right? But what Israel does is unique in the sense that, as I've described, all this legal attention is being provided by Israel with the absolute insistence that what we are doing is in compliance with international law. So I mentioned Gaza and the way Israel responded to demonstrations in recent weeks and so on. Israel insists that everything that it is doing is absolutely legal, not only according to Israeli law, but also according to international standards. The building of settlements, the policy of displacing Palestinians from Area C, everything else, like the endless list. You give me the human rights violation, and we would provide you with the endless Israeli legal argumentation that insists that this is actually okay, including, unfortunately, no small number of decisions by Israel's High Court of Justice that have basically, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, have accepted this reality and has helped provide a guise of legality to these systematic violations. So for those of you that are concerned about respect for international law, there's an essential need to realize that what Israel is doing is emptying international law from its principles, from its essence, from within, with the insistence that all this is with compliance with international law. And if that is allowed to go on, it has been allowed to go on for 50 years, then this is a terrible precedent that Palestinians are, the first ones on the receiving end of this reality, but the consequences of this may very well go much further than the reality in Israel-Palestine alone. Now, maybe some of you, maybe some of us have given some thought to, in this interplay between future and past and what will we do if this happens, but in fact maybe we realize that it has happened, but maybe we've played with ourselves in our minds this this thought experiment, right? If there would have been an official announcement that this and that has happened, one or all of the questions I presented at the beginning of my remarks, then this is what we would do. This is what our response would have been as activists, as elected officials, as governments, as the international community. If the red line were to have been crossed, maybe, I'm not sure this was the correct usage of the tense, then this is the effective, this would have been the strong reaction by the international community that would have pushed back against the crossing of that red line. And with great sadness, I have to say what is obvious, that even though all of these things have actually happened, they were not met with an effective international response that basically would have said to Israel, we do not accept this. Like, we reject this reality, and we reject this reality not only in language, but we reject this reality in action. And this is going to have consequences, and you, Israel, will need to make up your mind whether you want to continue occupying Palestine or whether you want to deal with the consequences. But you cannot continue enjoying this reality of perpetual occupation with no consequences. That deal has actually never been taken off the table by the international community. And of course, the first and foremost responsibility for the way things are lies with the people that are there, with Israelis, with Palestinians, of course, no question about that. But I'm here in a room in Italy, and it's impossible not to discuss the international responsibility for this reality and the specific European responsibility for this reality. So sometimes people in Europe would respond and say, well, you know, we don't have the leverage. Only the Americans would have the leverage. And it's true that the US certainly has more leverage than Europe, but you don't necessarily have to have the most leverage in order to have an impact. And of course, Europe, as the European Union, for instance, as Israel's #1 trade partner, has all the leverage needed in the world in order to inform the Israeli public that the deal is off the table and we need to make up our mind whether we're continuing this way or whether we are opting to deal with the consequences. And the repeated European decision not to use this leverage, and don't be mistaken, a decision, even if it's not announced, but the decision not to act is also a decision. And that silence, of course, speaks volumes and is heard very well every day in every election cycle, again, by the Israeli public. The decision not to act tells us that the sweet deal is still on the table, that the international community is continuing to accept it, that Europe is continuing to accept it. And just in the context of trade relations between the European Union and Israel, then of course it's impossible to ignore Article 2 of the Association Agreement between the EU and Israel that says that the entire basis for the relationship are the shared values of human rights and democracy. And of course, there is nothing shared between human rights and democracy and perpetual occupation of another people for half a century. So the values clearly are not shared anymore, and yet the Association Agreement stands and not challenged, and so on, which again sends the same message, the message of acceptance, of acquiescence of the world, of Europe, with this reality. Now, what the Israeli right is betting on, and at least in recent years it seems that the winds of history are on their side, is that the values will be shared again, but just in the opposite direction, not in the way that I would wish, not in the sense that values shared of human rights and democracy, but no, what the Israeli right is thinking about, fantasizing, and in some ways seeing the gradual realization of that is exactly the opposite, that values of rule of law, equality, human rights will decrease, will be defeated, also in Europe, also in North America, elsewhere around the world, and then once again, the values will be shared, but in the opposite direction, not the kinds of values that we would want to see shared. And this is another example in which the future of what happens in Israel-Palestine is interconnected with the future of what happens in Europe. And defeat of these values in Israel-Palestine is a terrible message, first and foremost, of course, for Palestinians, again, on the receiving end of this reality, also a terrible message for Israelis that do care, do wish to see a present and a future of justice and equality. And it's a terrible message also for Europeans. It's going to support the negative process that we're seeing in Hungary, in this country, in other countries, and so on and so forth. But we should all bear in mind that as much as the winds of history are blowing in that general direction in recent years, and especially during the last year since the elections in the US, it is not preordained that this is going to be the future for the next generation, for the next 50 years. We don't know that. The pendulum may very well swing back, and hopefully will swing back much sooner than what the right is planning for, which also means that the realization of these values successfully in Israel-Palestine would be a hugely, immensely significant accomplishment that would resonate in the most positive way, again, first and foremost for Palestinians, that for the first time in half a century, forever, will be able to enjoy justice and freedom, but also will resonate very strongly in Europe. It will be a positive example that could benefit all of us in support of living the kind of values that we want to see, living the kind of values that were an essential aspect, even if deeply imperfectly realized, but an essential part of the post-World War II order that we have cherished for such a long time. I'm going to say just two closing remarks, and after that we'll see, hopefully will be technically possible, we'll look at a short video clip produced by B'Tselem, actually in Italian. First time in our history that we have official content in Italian. And that clip focuses on one specific issue, the issue of forcible transfer. Israeli policy aimed to displace Palestinian communities inside the West Bank. But before we switch to the video clip, I just want to offer two thoughts looking forward. One is, I had this list of questions in the beginning and said, you know, all of these things already happened in the past. Maybe not all of you were completely convinced. So what I would do then is invite, I accept that. And then I would just like politely invite you to look forward, and since the processes are very gradual and there are no official announcements and so on, and if you don't pay attention, you will blink and 20 more years will pass, and we will still not have decided or agreed that the moment already has arrived and we didn't notice. So what I would invite you instead of that is to make up your own mind of what is the expiration date. Take a piece of paper, and even if you accept that this is temporary, even if you accept that some things have not arrived yet, then take a piece of paper and say, you know, okay, 50 years and a half, not temporary, still temporary, fine. Take a piece of paper, write on it 55 years, write on it 52 years, write on it 70 years, whatever, right? And don't lose that piece of paper, so that it could be a reminder for yourself, because that's the announcement. There is not going to be probably an official announcement. But that will be for you, the personal announcement, that that moment has happened. And then I would hope that it will also trigger for you personally what would be a meaningful, moral response to this unjust, unacceptable reality. What were you to do if that moment would have to arrive? Do that when you meet that piece of paper that you have written for yourself with regard to that. And the other thought, the other invitation at this time in which there's no peace process to obscure our thinking or to provide another guise for this continuous reality, to invite you to focus on something that is not theoretical, not dependent on any way on the existence of an Israeli partner for negotiations, a Palestinian partner for negotiations, all of these complicated issues that I know nothing about. And to invite you just to focus on the factual reality and the injustices that are a daily part of it, and ask yourself what you can do, regardless of the presence or absence of a peace process, in order to support justice, to support human rights, and not to allow this reality to continue in that fashion. And with that, hopefully we'll be able to see the video clip now.
floor at some point. Well, thank you. I, too, would like to begin with my thanks, which are heartfelt thanks to Luisa, to the Lelio Basso Foundation, for having invited me and having invited me to take part in the organization of these workshops, but also to participate in a beautiful international conference that was held in Rome that went by the title, "Is there a tribunal for Gaza?" That was an attempt of the Fondazione to attract attention to this theme immediately after the molten lead intervention in late 2008, early 2009, that had shocked everyone. And during the last 9 years, there have been many other military actions against the Gaza Strip, and that have been even more destructive, if possible, than that of 2008, that in itself seemed to be terribly shocking. And not only Gaza, but the whole of the Palestinian territory, the West Bank and Jerusalem, during these last 9 years, have dramatically worsened even more, with things stepping up in a truly terrible manner. So it is from this standpoint that I think that the Palestinian situation, and here I would like to react a little to the presentations we heard this morning. Mr. Abraham Berg said, perhaps it's a good thing that the Palestinian issue is not on the agenda every day, because this enables us to work in favor for or towards a peace process without having anyone breathing down our back or down our necks. So I think that instead, this is actually a huge problem. The fact that our mass media, the newspapers, the TV networks and so on, those who should keep an eye on what is happening and the terrible things that are being done in the Palestinian territories and against the people, the Palestinian people. Well, I think that our eyes should instead be firmly fixed on what is happening so as to be able to react in the right manner. Well, I'm a legal expert by trade. I deal with criminal crime and international criminal law. And I'm convinced that it is absolutely necessary to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, especially, and in any case, above all, in legal terms, in juridical terms, not because the political dimension is not important. The political perspective is perhaps higher up. It's like an overview. But we are, from a legal point of view, we are in an evolution, let's say, with regard to the Palestinian situation. And so politics actually has little to say unless certain principles of international law are not reaffirmed and not confirmed. And here I'm repeating what HagaiEl said about international law and its role and what it should do. But because of the shortcomings, because of our just being by-watchers, well, it's not happening. So the fact of taking the legal perspective and putting it in the forefront, well, this is a teaching. This is something that I have been that I learned from Araji Sourani, the director of the Palestinian Service for Human Rights in Gaza. And this was fundamental for me in understanding what is actually happening in the territories. And I remember very, very well, he would constantly say to all the delegates visiting from the various European governments and non-European governments, the delegations of the International Red Cross, the parliamentarians from all over the world, he would incessantly say, when they would ask, what do you think about the two-state solution? What should be done? And he would say, one state, two states, 1,000, 0 states. We're not interested in that. Right now, what we are interested in as Palestinians is that someone should fight for respect of our fundamental rights and the right to life, which is being trampled on constantly. And as was said quite clearly in the introduction, it is self-evident that right now Israel is truly ignoring and taking no notice of human rights and what the United Nations say, and reinstatement of legality. I am going to try to be very concise because I want time for the debate. So I would like to focus on a single point amongst the many ideas that were presented this morning. There is one in particular that goes even beyond what has been already said, and that is the role of the legal experts and jurists with regard to what is happening in the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And first and foremost, I would like to speak about the role of the Israeli jurists. This is something that we cannot overlook, because as was framed and stated by an Israeli jurist, Michel Staat, that we had invited but could not be here with us. He is a lawyer in Israel, and for decades he has been defending the rights of the Palestinian people, and in particular in the West Bank. So what is happening in Israel at this point in time is an annexation through what he calls loafer, an English term which is difficult to translate into Italian, but if you see the analogy with warfare, so war practices, lawfare is a new term that says using the law as a means, means for making war. So a guy was saying, what Israel is doing perhaps is not more severe, or it is not the worst violation of human rights that has ever happened. There's no doubt about this, but what is important is that it is emptying from the inside the very meaning of international law, and it is doing this thanks to the work of jurists, of legal experts who sit on the various committees, who sit on those committees appointed by the Israeli government, and that are also the judges in the various courthouses across Israel, the military ones, but also the Israeli Supreme Court, which obviously we respect. Well, some decisions that have to do with the Israeli situation of the Jewish citizens of Israel. There's a sort of schizophrenia within the case law of the Israeli Supreme Court, which truly uses a two-speed approach depending on the subject matter put to it. And what, in my view, needs to be understood is that this annexation of the occupied territories is not something that has to do with the future. It's not something that can be debated as if it were a possibility, a hypothetical possibility that may occur. No, it has happened, and it is happening, something that Michael Sfar defines as the biggest paradigm shift since 1967. That is to say that whereas in these 50 years Israel has used practices and actions to make the annexation a fact, so it's a de facto annexation, or facts on the ground, and by establishing or by creating the new settlements and by in adopting systems with regard to the roads that separate the Palestinian peoples and the wall that divides the villages and so on. So these are all facts that made annexation a fact. So what we are now witnessing in the utmost silence is a de jure annexation, and this is something that is happening at this point in time, and we need to talk about it, and this is being done through the work of the jurists who are drafting laws that I'm going to briefly present to you, laws then adopted by the European Parliament. No, again, European. I think that this lapsus does have some sort of meaning, says the gentleman, says Franco Ippolito. Well, the Israeli Parliament, Knesset, will be passing these laws, adopting these laws. So, and here I truly, I go back to Michael Svard's words, who says the finest of Israeli jurists are working in order to bring about this paradigm shift since 1967. Now, the lawyers of the government are engaged in providing advice on how to write and draft the laws to defend Israel's efforts to expand its jurisdiction and the efficacy of its laws, of its administrative structure, going beyond the boundaries acknowledged at the international level, the line according to the armistice of 1949, and that is the occupied territories, and this to be at the service of the Jewish settlers at the expense of the Palestinians, that are the occupied peoples whose civil rights are suspended, are put on hold. The legal system deriving from all this is a legal system that is a fact in the West Bank, so it already exists, and it envisages that the laws of the Israeli parliament, the civilian laws, normal laws of Israel should apply also to the settlers who live in the settlements in the West Bank. And as you know, they are not just little villages or small groups of houses, but we're speaking about, including East Jerusalem, they amount to 500,000, that is 350,000 plus 150,000. So we're speaking about towns with all the possible infrastructure, theaters, universities, universities that by law are acknowledged or recognized as being part of the normal education system of Israel. Now, all this just to say that the West Bank, as an occupied territory, is subject to legal orders that are totally different, where the settlers benefit from laws that are favorable for them, including the expropriation of Palestinian land, and in the interest of the settlements themselves, and the colonizers. Those who are colonized, the Palestinians, are subject to military law and have no possibility whatever of claiming their civil rights that they should be entitled to. In a one-state solution, this would be the case. All residents of the territory administered by the State of Israel should all have the same rights. So at this point, they are constantly and regularly using the concept of apartheid. And while a few years ago, in my opinion, people could even have some doubts as to the actual, as to whether this term should really be used to describe what is happening, as a legal term, let's say, to describe what is happening in Palestine and Israel. Well, I think that today there are no doubts with regard to the fact that this is what the situation is. This is the situation of the Palestinians within this larger Israel, which already exists. And the situation is one of apartheid, where one portion of the population that holds power uses all of the mechanisms of administration and of power to maintain its superiority and to maintain a part of the population in conditions of oppression. So, with regard to this, there is a report that I would like to inform you about. You might know about it, but it's worth reading. and it is very significant. It reflects exactly what is happening at the international level when the issue on the table is Israel. It is a 2017 report ordered by one of the United Nations agencies, and it was written, amongst others, by Professor Richard Falk, who was the special rapporteur of the United Nations for Palestine. And this report, after analyzing in depth the situation of the territory, it maintains that what is happening at the expense of the Palestinians is the crime of apartheid. Now, this report was published a day and a half after its publication. It disappeared from the internet, and it never again reappeared. However, on that day and a half, a sufficient number of people had downloaded it so that then it could be reposted on other sites. And obviously, at that point, it was an unhoped-for publicity for what had been happening. It has already been translated into Italian. So if you'd like to read it, I'll give you all the information and the references that are necessary. And I would like to close by making a few examples of the discriminations that are a fact by law, that are warranted by the law in Israel. Drawing from this article written by Nina Haas on International, published on International. And on the 4th of March, the Israeli journalist who lives in Ramallah draws up a list of laws that have either been approved or are about to be approved by Knesset. Zone A is an occupied territory. So she said that Ramallah is part of the occupied territories, and somebody seen from the audience seems to be questioning this.
Can you please respond to the fact if Ramallah is occupied territory or not?
Certo che lo... no.
Maybe we can discuss it.
Perhaps we can talk about this in private. No, let's talk about it publicly. Since I don't want to create any type of ambiguity or because of ambiguity, I think that your position is linked to the Oslo agreements that divided the Palestinian occupied territory into A, B, and C. A is under the jurisdiction, political and security jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority that was set up in Oslo, whereas Area B is under Israel, and political control is of the Palestinian Authority, and Area C is where Israel prevails. But the whole of the area, A, B, and C, is West Bank, is Palestinian territory that has been occupied. And the fact that it was created at the Oslo process, which is defunct, an A area, which is made up of urban centers like Ramallah, Janina, and other towns like Bethlehem, Jericho. Well, this removes nothing from the military occupation of the territory by the occupiers who are Israel. And if there are any doubts, I'll pass the floor to HagaiEl-Ad.
Like if it was something that you can argue about.
Yeah, I'm surprised that this is even a question. This temporary arrangement, again, it was supposed to expire after 5 years, I'm just like continuing what Chantal was saying, was made, this needs to be perhaps clarified, was made on a demographical basis. This has no geographical logic. So the areas that were designated under partial or supposedly complete Palestinian control are, you know, the big Palestinian cities and the major villages, but they're completely disconnected one from the other. So you end up in a reality that has been in effect for more than a generation by now, in which there are some 170 or so isolated Palestinian islands, A and area known as Area A and B, that are embedded in this ocean of Israeli control, Area C. But by controlling 60% of the area formally, we of course control all of the area and all of the people. Like you cannot travel from one Palestinian city to another without going through Area C. You cannot develop infrastructure that depends on that kind of like interconnectedness without going through Area C. Israel's army routinely goes into Area A whenever it wants. Israel controls the envelope, right? So we decide who goes in and out of the West Bank. People, commerce, everything. And of course, the same thing with regard to Gaza, with the exception of the one crossing between Rafah and the Sinai in Egypt. So, and we control the population registry and so on and so forth. So for anyone to think that somehow Palestinians in Area A live an independent life in a reality in which the Palestinian Authority is, completely exists or doesn't exist absolutely as a result of the Israeli decisions, and even in the best case scenario, serves as the municipality in those areas, nothing more, nothing less. But everyone knows that everywhere in the occupied territories there is one power that controls everything, and that is us. These are undeniable facts.
As soon as Professor Meloni concludes, I'll give you the floor for your comments. I was trying to give a short example of the sort of laws that have been adopted by the Knesset or are now being debated by the Israeli parliament, which, according to Amira Haas, are clear evidence of discrimination against the Palestinians. The first law, it's the law on the nation state, the Jewish nation state, which has been already adopted after 3 votes, whereby sort of introduces the notion of areas which are reserved for the Jews and where Palestinians have no right to live. And the Arab language is considered as a language with a special statute rather than being on a par with the Israeli language. And then there is a difference in terms of how the declaration of war should be exercised. The Prime Minister has the power to declare war after consulting the Defense Minister rather than the whole cabinet. And then there is a law of Jewish tradition. When the state laws are not clear, the judges have got to consult the Halka, the Jewish law, and then the law that will make it mandatory on all enterprises with over 100 employees that refuse to work to announce it openly. And then finally, there is a further law for annulation, whereby the parliament may sort of render null and void the decisions of parliament. For instance, the decision against the deportation of African refugees, which is now being debated. And the next would be the Palestinians or the left-wing activists. This is just to give you some examples of what is happening. If you look at the article written by Michel Sard, well, you'll find other changes which are now ongoing in Israel. In conclusion, I think that if we really want to deal with the problem of failure to achieve a state of peace in the Palestinian-Israeli territory, we have to look at things from a perspective of international law, because the international community was at the core of this very problem, which in 1947, with the declaration of the General Assembly of the UN, has sort of partitioned a territory.
Pensavo fosse per me, non è.
Sorry, I felt there's a problem there. And this makes it something which is of concern for the international community and also international law. I'll stop at that. So there will be a possibility to ask questions and to have a general discussion.
Allora, il primo intervento, prego, la signora, no, al microfono, così registriamo.
Use a microphone, please, for questions.
Something to talk? First, thanks, Luisa. I don't remember these days. I still feel young. You know, my first arrest was when I was 18 years old. I was taken to the Secret Service for 38 hours. To be investigated on, you know, illegal demonstration, something related to the fact that the PLO wasn't legal. My brother was 17 years old when he was in 88. You know, I told Avraham Burg today that he took Yasser Arafat, the late Yasser Arafat, in 88 too serious when he declared the Palestinian state in Algiers, and he went in Haifa and he was putting Palestinian flags in the Haifa city, our city. He was jailed for half a year of his life. My brother today runs 18 branches of an Israeli company that have almost half of their workers are Jewish workers. And he's the Arab director of this district. And he's happy today. But we thought in 92, 93, both of us came back home. And my mother used to hide the Palestinian flag at home. When they came to search our home, they didn't find the Palestinian flag. She was very good in that. And she was putting the flag on the balcony of our neighborhood, in our house, in the center of this neighborhood. And we came, both of us, and we told her, you know what, we paid the price, forget it, it's fine, we are liberated. I think most of the people sitting here thought in 92, 95 that we are liberated, and I think most also of the Jewish activists, and this was partly our mistake. And this is also the experience of South Africa. Even after the liberation of the South Africans from the apartheid regime, they still have to struggle for better South Africa and also for better Africa. Now, we as Palestinians living inside Israel, looking at you here, it's good news for us. You don't believe it. Usually people, you know, I ask you how many people will come here. You said, you know, maybe not many people, but anybody abroad that do care about the situation, give us some hope to go on the struggle. And we are in the middle of the struggle. And I think also looking at our Jewish partners, Hagai and Avraham Burg and Norit, I think we need more and more to see you on the ground with the Palestinian community. We are 20% of the population in Israel. We are citizens of the state of Israel. We are second-class citizens. You can say more than second-class citizens. We have been living under military regime until '66. We still have different legal systems in Israel. One that guarantee collective rights to the Jewish population, even Jews in in Rome. They can come whenever they want, and they will get my tax money. So there is a system that guarantees collective rights to Jews everywhere, not only in Israel. And there is a system that undermines our rights as Palestinians and as Arabs. It's broadcasting laws that in the TV, in the public TVs even, you don't have enough Arabic language. It's up to 5% of the broadcasting, and it's usually after midnight. And why is this? Partly because the Jewish Israelis were building in Israel some kind of a ghetto, Jewish ghetto, isolated from the Middle East. And I want to be frank with my friends also in the Jewish progressive voices in Israel and abroad, that it's about time to look about, I took seriously the, analysis from the within of the Israeli situation. So being Palestinian that speak Hebrew, and I used to write also in the Israeli media in Hebrew and Arabic, and Palestinian activist, we look at the debate inside the Palestinian and inside the Jewish community, and we can understand better than anybody else what's going on in the Jewish population, let's say, better than most Arabs and Palestinians. We know what's going on in the Jewish population because we live inside what's so-called the Jewish state. And when it practices its democracy toward us, it's a Jewish democracy toward us. Let it be clear, like any law that they want to approve, they will approve. Even the citizenship law that will prevent us from getting married from Palestinians from the other side of the Green Line. Somebody was asking about Ramallah. If a Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel want to get married to Palestinian from Ramallah, the Palestinian from Ramallah can't come and live and get citizenship. Never. It's temporary law since 2003. Think about it, temporary law. But I would like to take this discussion also to see what can be done also beyond to come here and to complain about the situation. We did our best to look at what's going on in the Jewish population and to try to understand how the election results that for the last 20 years, since 97 actually, since 96, 97, how we can make the shift that once again the Arab-Palestinian population will be part of the bloc that will create some kind of peaceful agreement between the Palestinians and the Jews. This is what happened for the first time in 92 to 95, that the Arab members of the Knesset, they were 6 in that days, they were part of the bloc that guaranteed the majority needed to approve the Oslo process, and more than the Oslo process, the return back of the Palestinian fighters, the PLO, to come back for the first time since 48 to the land of Palestine and to run the struggle on the land of Palestine. This is a very important issue that usually people abroad don't see it. The Palestinian cause have been, abused by the Arab regimes and some of the Arab countries around us. And part of our challenge today is how we will build more brave relationship with people like you, that we share the values, and how we will say the Saudians are not our allies. You are Italians, much more our allies and supporters in ending our tragedy than the Saudi Arabia and than these regimes that try to talk on our behalf. And it's very important in this liberation process to come to the international community and say, no, our struggle is not with the Saudi Arabia and it's not with Qatar. Our struggle is with you, people that believe in the values of human rights, people that struggle for human rights. And when we take the election results, again and again, for the last 20 years, we see that there is more and more identity voting in Israel, and it's not only about right and left. It's not the typical left. If you take the last election results, look here, one of the fourth political party, the third political party today in Israel is actually the Arab community. We gained in the last election the joint list. It's the first time that the Arab community have been united in one list. We are the third political power today as Palestinians, Arab citizens of the state of Israel. But if you take Yesh Atid and you take Kulanu and you take other political parties, you see the identity trends, the identity voting trends. You see that Shas and you see that Kulanu and you see even Israel Betenu is much more identity voting than two-state solution or than peace and war issues. They really, the center right in Israel today, really don't care about the occupation because there is no price for the occupation, of course. The Israelis are not paying the price of the occupation today. So that's why if you take Kulanu and Kahlon, the Minister of Finance today, and ask yourself what his position in two-state solution, he's much more in favor of one-state solution, but he's the only Israeli minister today that actually meet every month with the Palestinian leadership and talk about, funding transfer and issues related to the cooperation between the PA and the Israelis. If you look at the identity voting trends, and it's very important, all the speakers here actually, You know, beside the recognition that we, 20% of the population, and I think that's part of the talks that we had during the years, we have been recognized as a political power by the international actors. All international actors deal with the Jewish community in Israel as one. All of them are elite Ashkenaz usually, that vote from the Labour Party to the joint list. Unfortunately, for the last 20 years, we did all the analysis that needed internally for us to strategize as a Palestinian community. It's clear for us more and more that if we will not outreach to the Mizrahi community, the Oriental Jewish community that came from Arab countries, that have big issue, historical issue, with the Jewish Ashkenaz that were implementing the Nakba in 48, and were part of the beginning of building the Jewish state and demolishing our heritage and history, they have a business of humiliation of this community between the Mizrahi elites and leadership and community, and the leadership of the peace camp, Ashkenazi peace camp in Israel, especially the Labour Party people. It's related to what happened in Israel in the 50s and the 60s. And I think it's about time to start to look for allies, and there is people in the Jewish Mizrahi community that look at Israel as part of the Middle East, and they are not looking for the future of isolation. Two-state solution with wall in between, which Palestine will be there, the Jews will be here, and what you will do with us, the Palestinian community in Israel. 20% of the population in Israel, Palestinians. So if you look at the politics of identity in Israel and social and economic issues, you will understand that we need to start to talk to the Mizrahi community, to the Russian community, to the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox communities, and find allies. I'm telling you what we are doing today to liberate ourselves. It's not enough to struggle in the streets and to block the streets, and it's not easy struggle. Many people pay the price also of this struggle. The whole issue after the 2015 election results, it was clear for us that the two-state solution and peace agenda has been marginalized. It's not important for, this was the election results. The minority rights, we were an issue in the election day for Bibi Netanyahu, the Palestinian community. The fact that we will go and vote in the election day, it was an issue for the Arabs are coming in droves. This is how Bibi Netanyahu was referring to our right to go and vote in the election day. And, social rights became much more important. The housing prices were going up, and there is a price. You need to finance the occupation in the end of the day. If you need to finance the occupation and you need to pay 70 billion shekel for the army, for the IDF, to implement the occupation, somebody needs to pay taxes. So the housing prices are getting up, and more people are paying taxes to hold small group of settlers that control 13 million people. It's like 500,000 settlers that today took over all the political agenda in Israel and hold all of us responsible to their wish of big Israel. The whole identity issue voting, I think you have also for the future debate. If you really want to strategize and to listen to what we, at least the Palestinian community in Israel, think today, you have to start to see how to have better impact, to have better weight also to people that represent communities that usually in the election day, they will vote for something called center-left, center-right. If you will take Shas, for example, in 92, 93, 95, Shas were part of the supporters of Yitzhak Rabin agreement with the PLOs. They recognized villages in the north, while the settlers, Ariel and his people today, are demolishing full villages in the Negev inside Israel, in the south of Israel. Bedouin community, 1,200 houses were demolished by Ariel and the settlers. You know why? Because they want to push the Palestinian community in Israel inside the military confrontation. Other side of what they do, they allow, also with the help of the Secret Service, smuggling weapons to the Palestinian community in Israel. We pay very high price. In the last, between 2000 and today, we have small war inside the Palestinian community. 1,300 people were killed internally inside the Palestinian community. Yes, we are suffering today from crisis inside the Palestinian community, which we need to deal with it. The last election, and I would like to connect our discussion also what Italy can do, what you as Italian can do. The last election, it was much more, and it's clear today, between the Democratic Party in the US, or at least parts of the Democratic Party in the US, and the Republican Party. It was Sheldon Adelson who was leading and supporting Bibi Netanyahu, Sheldon Adelson with his newspaper also. And it's very important to see the link between the Republican Party in the US and what's going on in Israel and the Saudians. When you look at the whole issue of Iran, you see Bibi in the front, but it's also the Saudians that are leading this region to another catastrophe. I think in this sense, human rights issues should be, I totally agree with you, we should hold the human rights values, but it's not enough. We have also to start to strategize and to deal with the situation in different way. Now, when it comes to what can be done, I think it's very important. You know, yesterday I met with a desk officer of Palestine and Israel, and usually when we go and meet in Brussels and people, and you know, from Brussels to member states, the whole usual answer that we get, you know, what we can do, okay? We are very weak. I don't believe that the EU is very weak. I know that the EU is not weak. You know, like if the PA today and Abu Mazen is the only Arab leader today that tell Trump, you know what, I don't want to take your deal. You know, Trump is offering the Palestinians historical deal. So the only Arab today in the whole Arab region out of the 22 countries, or at least 20, take Syria out, that tell Trump, no, I don't want your deal, is the weak Palestinian leader that tell Trump, no, I will not accept your deal. I hope that he will go on with this position, and we have to ensure that he will go on with this position. But you as Italians are members of the EU. You have scientific agreement with the EU. You have Horizon 2020 with the EU. You have cooperation, cultural cooperation, sports cooperation. I will take one example. We have 500,000 settlers that practically violate every international law, okay? I would like to see more and more people forbidden from getting to Italy, for example, because they are somehow violating human rights in our region. And this is something that can be done in different European countries, to take a list of the leaders of the settlers that are targeting us, targeting Haggai. You know, his name, they put his name and they put pictures of Jewish leaders of human rights organizations in billboards all over the Israel, not only to shame them, but also to harass them. And I think we need you to make sure whenever they will land in Italy, in Rome, their name will be in the blacklist, and they will not enjoy the fact that Israel is have economic and have exchange agreement with Italy. This is something that you can do whenever El-Al flight come to Rome airport. I think two people can stand there and tell them, look, you enjoy Rome, but you also implement occupation for more than 51 years. I know that you have been prevented from coming to Palestine, but this is something, and your commitment here, this is something that we needed in every European airport. We need you to welcome the Israelis, welcome to Europe, but end the occupation. This is something very simple that can be done in the Italian level in Rome if you don't want to come to our, if you can't at least come to our region. The whole EU trade political agreements, I think we have to target the settlers and the settlers organizations. We can offer you a list of organizations like Le Havre that should be in the list of terror organizations. They are very good in that, to take the names of Palestinian organizations and to push, you know, Hamas in the list of terror organizations. I think we have enough Jewish terrorist organizations that are attacking Arab community in the streets, like Le Havre, and what Le Havre do in the streets of Jerusalem. Okay? Put them in the list of terror organizations and harass them and help them. When it comes to the US, I think the US, you know, at least today it's very clear, you know, with what's going on with Trump and the Republican Party. I think in 2 years, maybe the midterm election, we'll have it soon. We will need your help also. There's church organizations that you have church organizations also here. You have also democratic parties, and you have the Jewish community. We want to see more and more Jewish activists in the pro-Palestinian and pro-peace movement in Italy and all over Europe. And this has to be also one of the goals, and I say it as Palestinian. We want them to be part you know, as minorities in New York or here, they feel what I feel as a minority inside Israel. And I think it's about time to pay the price. There is no place for cultural cooperation, science cooperation, and sports. When Bitar Jerusalem team screamed for 90 minutes death to Arabs in the football games, they should be treated like Barcelona or like any other team, and you should use the information that comes from human rights organizations and from Palestinian organizations. The last point that I would like to say about what we expect from you in the side of the region, outside of Italy, I think it's very important that you start to understand our allies are the Arab people, the Arab region. You are our allies. You are our partners. The progressive Jewish voices are our partners, not the Arab regimes. What they did in the region, the crisis that we face in the region, is helping Bibi Netanyahu to come to the Jewish public and to tell them, it's a forest around. Okay, you know that the crisis in the region partly was supporting and helping the extreme right wing also in Europe. We are not interested in this crisis. This crisis was initiated and funded by Arab regimes that are not interested in democracy in the region. And we, as human rights activists, as people that are looking for liberation from the occupation, we don't have any shared values with these regimes, and we hope that you will make it clear also for your Italian government that we are not expecting anything from the whole Saudian initiative. This is like at least in the part of what can be done in the region. For us, as Palestinians inside Israel, we are doing our best to build a new discourse of solidarity between communities, discourse of multicultural country, not discourse of a Jewish state. There is in Israel different backgrounds, different immigration communities, and I think we have thousands of Palestinians that study in Russia, for example. We try to activate them lately to outreach to the Russian community. 1 million Russians that I don't see any reason why they should keep voting for Lieberman and supporting the extreme agenda. I have a few minutes more.
Very few.
Very few.
Also because we wanted to hear more about the internal contradiction.
So.
No, you have a few minutes.
In any case, part of also what is dealt with in the side of the Palestinian community inside Israel and in the West Bank is to create much more cooperation between Palestinians from inside Israel and in the occupied territories. When you look at the situation inside Israel, until now, we were too much protecting ourselves from the attack that we face from the Israeli governments and also in the Jewish public. We lost 56 Arab citizens as a result of police violence, that Arab citizens that have been shot and killed by police officers inside Israel. So we suffer from systematic discrimination and oppression inside Israel. But still, if each one of us will get one Jewish citizen and try to convince him that this struggle is not to throw them in the sea, but to build a new future for all of us, this is also something that we should take on our responsibility. And if you look at the EU and also the American peace-building programs, Italian peace-building programs, the Arab community have been marginalized outside. Lately, the PA and the Palestinian organizations from Hamas to Fatah, all of them, they understood the importance of the Palestinian community in Israel, and we created teams of cooperation. Partly also one of the teams that have been created in the PLO lately was a team of the Palestinians, the PLO, to outreach to the Jewish public and to try to convince the Jewish public and to outreach in parallel to the struggle. And the non-violent struggle is something that we were holding for since '48 as Palestinians inside Israel. And the nonviolent struggle is part of the struggle that have been promoted. And what is happening in Gaza in the since the land day until today is part of the new strategy. I hope that we will be able to strengthen this strategy as Palestinians in parallel to the struggle and confrontation with the occupation. The outreach to the Jewish public is very important. We need to tell the Jewish public what is the future of the region in our eyes, and the region future is to take the Jewish communities to be part of the Middle East and not to be isolated from the Middle East. The peace that we are promoting is peace of solidarity, of a multicultural region and open borders. The peace that we are promoting is not peace of two-state solution, of separation with walls in between. It's a peace built in integration of the Jewish community in the Middle East. This is different discourse than the discourse that was promoted by the peace camp in Israel for the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jafar, because you've put on the table a number of points that we'll have to address during our third conference, but we will take into account what you said and your suggestions. That being said, I'd like to call upon Nurit Pele Delanan. Who's the director of the Department of Communication, David Nahin College in Jerusalem, and she's also a member of staff of the faculty of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And most importantly, Nurit has been, with many others, the coordinator of the Russell Tribunal for Palestine, which was held right after the the operation in Gaza. She wrote a very important book, research that she has carried out on how Palestinians are depicted to school children and how the Palestinian issue is addressed in the school textbooks in Israel. And she has been designated as a Sakharov Prize winner in European Parliament for her work on human rights. I'd like to give the floor to Nurit because of her courage, her intelligence, and her involvement. She was an important face of the Israeli community. Thank you, Luisa. Thank you for the invitation.
I didn't know that all of you understand English, so I took care to translate my slides to Italian, but I will speak around them in English. So this is the title, for those who don't understand Italian, the rhetoric of the legitimation of distancing, exclusion, and elimination of Palestinians in Israeli school books. This is my book in Italian, anyone who wants to read it. And most of the translations come from there. My question was formed really around this question of Frantz Fanon, who wondered how the oppressors behave, and I want to know how the oppressors educate their children. And in more blatant words, how come Israeli boys and girls become monsters once they are 18? It bothered me a lot for obvious reasons. In Israel, there's never been peace education, officially, and the ministry discourages any kind of meeting between Palestinians and Israelis. There are a few private schools where Arab and Jewish children study together in the two languages, but these are private schools, not state schools. School books, why do we have school books anyway? Okay. School books are meant really to legitimate the state. Can you read? Is that okay? Okay. To legitimate the state and to mold little children to be the citizens that the state is interested in. In Israel, of course, they are meant to inculcate the Zionist narrative and to create a national territorial identity for the Jews and Arab-Israeli identity for the Arab students, which is a different thing. Okay. Now, in Israel, all school books are private. Anybody can write a school book, and teachers can choose whatever they want. There are hundreds of them, but they all have to be authorized by the ministry. That's why they have to have some ideological common ground or supposizione di base. This is one type of this supposizione. What exists? Can you read? Okay, so just read it. I don't have to read it for you. All right? Okay. This is the second type. What may be the case, okay? So as you see, the Arab citizens are a terrible demographic problems. Some books even write a terrible demographic nightmare that must be solved, and the Palestinians in the territories are all assassins or future assassins. What is desirable for the Jews or for Israel, of course, is big Israel and Jewish majority at all times. But the question is, what do you do with all the others if you have to keep a Jewish majority at all cost? So I think Israel is handled or managed by what Zygmunt Bauman called the gardening metaphor. You can read that here. All right? It means that some elements have to be exterminated because they don't fit, and some other elements can be cultivated to fit. So in Israel, we really have these two elements. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. We have a group of others that are marginalized people that are Jewish, namely Arab Jews or Ethiopian Jews. And we have people who are not Jewish, but they are not Arabs. So we can cultivate them, okay? Which means they undergo elimination that is cultural, or what is called in more serious term, a cultural genocide. Their language, their religion, their culture, everything is eliminated, but they are not killed because they are needed for increasing the number of Jews and the number of whites, the Russian non-Jews, for example, and they are needed to replace Palestinians in labor. So they are not killed, their bodies are still needed. The other group is the Palestinians, and they are treated as a different race. They are not subject, they are not candidates for any kind of assimilation or integration, and they should be eliminated physically and culturally. For example, this is from a geography school books. As you see, it's a Jewish versus Arab population, but with the Jewish population, we see Jews and others. So who are the others that deserve to be in our group? These others are the non-Arabs that are not Jewish. They deserve to be with us. Another thing that you can see, these people are caricaturized, but they can be anybody. They can be Italian or French or Jew. They have nothing Jewish about them. Here you have the racist icon of the Alibaba with the camel and his wife. Throughout the book, whenever they speak about Arabs, they show this caricature, which really resembles nobody in the world. So the legitimation of this practice of elimination in school books have, I should say, 5 layers, okay? How do you legitimate this to children? The fact that people should be eliminated and are eliminated. So first of all, you turn them into abstraction. You don't show their face, never. And if they are an abstraction, like a problem, a nightmare, whatever, then you don't have to use ethical or moral considerations when you speak about them, okay? Because, this is what I said, okay? For example, this is the Palestinian problem in one of the books. There is nothing Palestinian about it. It's an environmental problem, and there are no people. In all the Israeli school books, and there are hundreds of them, you don't find one photograph of a Palestinian human being. Only the caricature of Alibaba and some other stereotypes. We'll see. What does it say about this Palestinian problem? You see here. All right? It's not only a problem, it's a poisonous problem, like bilharzia or something, you know. All right. Here, even the most crowded place in the world, they managed to show empty of people, which is what this researcher say, Van Leuven, he said this is the point of view of the pilot before dropping the bomb. This is, yes. Now what is this? Okay. Again, you speak about the camp very abstractly. There are no people there. It's just a dirty place, okay, where level of hygiene is very low. Most books don't speak about checkpoints, but I found this one in a new civic studies book. You see the checkpoint is empty of people. No people in the checkpoint. So for the children who are about to join the army, to do checkpoints is not such a bad thing, you see? It's lovely. Now this friend of Winnie the Pooh, oops, what's his name? The owl tells you that administrative detention is a very good way to defend our democracy. This, the children of Israel never see, okay? And then when everything is abstract, you can ask rational questions. What is the point of checkpoints? Disadvantaged, advantage, how is it good for democracy? Not good because you don't know there are people involved and you don't see them. Okay, you don't see that. The best way to make people abstract and to push them out is in maps, of course. Okay? What is called silencio geografico. Geographical silence, it means you just eliminate them from the map. This is a map of Arab population inside Israel. But on this map, not even one Arab city is mentioned. Not even Nazareth, not Acre, not Al-Fahim, nothing. So the impression is that these rectangles, you see, these concentrations of Arabs really live on top of us. Okay, you see that? They're encroaching us. The West Bank is colorless. And the legends say this is a zone without data, which means there are no people there, okay, because it's a population map. It's empty. Nobody's there. Another way, which is very common in Israeli school books, is what we call mental maps, right? Mental maps, like in the map of the world, in the European version of the map of the world, Europe is in the middle, right? But it's not really in the middle. So this is mental map, and of course we don't know anything else except maps today for the territory. You don't know the territory of Italy, you know the map. So this is what is said in one book. Can you read? Everyone can read? Yeah. Okay, so you'd think we speak about Australia, right? Some remote villages where you cannot bring water and electricity. So this is the point of Melton Bump. Second, since they are such a problem, we must push them and put them in boundaries. This is logical, right? For example, what is the purpose of Judaizing or Jewifying the Galilee? Yes? Building Jewish settlements on top of Arab villages in the Galilee. This is what they say, the geography book. And they talk about the citizens, not the non-citizens, all right? And the books tell you in a very scientific way that all this does not contradict the democracy, you see? Okay? All right. And anyway, they are to blame because they lost the war. What Jafar talked about before, the raising or the ethnic cleansing of the Bedouin from the Negev, here is how it is presented in school books. This is the way it is. They are not recognized by the state. How can people be not recognized? This is not discussed. All right? It's a scientific fact. So they don't get water, they don't get infrastructure, they don't get anything, and they're being eliminated. This nobody sees, of course. Number 3, since we have to shut them down, the military government is justified, right? Because they have to be confined, not to mix with us. Okay? Now, of course, la terra libera is la terra confiscata of the Palestinians, yes. How do you create distance? How do you eliminate them? Jafar spoke before about the citizenship law, yes, that says that you can read. This is the law. Right? It's an emergency law. Everything is emergency law, so of course they don't, yeah. Now, the need to eliminate them, the need of a Jewish majority, this is the most important value to keep a Jewish majority. So if they marry, they cannot come to live. If they're not recognized, we should cleanse them. And of course, it legitimates the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, as you see here. Okay, it was a good thing. But how do you convince children that these people are really so bad that they have to be eliminated? You must use racist discourse. You must treat them in a racist way. A racist way, it means to say that they're primitive, they're parasites, they're outlaws, they're vile, and they're dangerous. Okay? And they are the enemy from within, as we saw before. For example, this. Okay, they are simply bad people. This is another racist icon to show Palestinians today. It's called the Oxfam image. Yeah, Oxfam always has these images of the poor third world farmers. And this one, which I showed you before, okay? And of course, they refuse to live in high buildings. They're very capricciosi. As you see, it looks like nobody. Nobody looks like that in the world, not only in Palestine. It's an Alibaba taking from European drawings of Alibaba from the 19th century. But this is the picture that runs throughout the book of geography, all the time. Okay? And if you know a little bit about semiotics, this is closure. You see, this space is closed, and you see the vector from the camel to the house. This is what the camel thinks about the house. All right? And the last thing, of course, is to legitimate the massacres of Palestinians. Since they are such a problem, we have to confine them, we have to distance them, we have to get rid of them. So the books legitimate the massacres. Okay? Now, as you see in this text, they don't legitimate them by the reasons. They cannot write, we went to kill them. But they are legitimated by the consequences. Okay? After Deir Yassin, so many people got the message and left, and this was a miracle. Even the president said that. Okay? So it's not we kill them because we want to kill them, of course not. But the consequences, a posteriori, legitimate it. Now, why do they die? Okay? Why do they die all the time? They usually die because they don't do as they are told, like in Gaza. You remember 2014? We told them to leave. They didn't leave. What can I do? Or by mistake. Oops, sorry. All right? So here are two explanations that we get in the books. In Deir Yassin, they died because the loudspeaker didn't work, as you see. And in Kibya, and 1953, they died because the soldiers didn't know they were hiding in their homes that night. Okay? Which is not very elaborate explanation, technical. But what the books emphasize is that the death of Palestinians always bring some confidence to the Jews. And this is very important, as you see here. Here they even, yeah. Okay? It's good for the army, it's good for the people. Okay? This is a quote. Okay? In this book, they say the purpose of the massacre was to raise the morale of the people and the soldiers. And then, again, you can ask some questions from the children, like these questions. Yes? And this one. And of course, the answer is it raises the morale. To know that 50 Egyptians were killed and 40 taken prisoners is raising the morale of the Jewish population. So the lesson from, or the general message from the reports about massacres is this. After every massacre, these books are a little bit old. Today, after I finished my book, the new books don't even speak about that. In the new books, you have hardly any Arabs and hardly any Ethiopians. Okay, the Jabalia camp was replaced by a refugee camp in Darfur. It's very nice to speak about, other places. But in the books that do mention the massacres, after every report about the massacres, you have this page that makes a myth of the soldiers. Okay, you see the soldiers who are so beautiful, erect, proud, happy, and clean. Very clean after the massacre. And the Chief of Staff, Dayan, is coming to congratulate them. And you have a song in their honor, which Roland Barthes will tell you makes the myth. Okay, a glorifying picture and a glorifying song. This is after Dir Yassin. Again, our beautiful, erect soldiers. This is from a village near Dir Yassin, the Castel. But it's the same. As you see, his arm is pointing here to the road to Jerusalem, which they liberated. And here there is a very, very known kind of hymn to the brave soldier. And the whole massacre is here, only that. Okay, so when you read this whole double spread, you come out with the impression that something big and good happened because such wonderful people could not have done an unjustified wrong. This is the point. And the text always praises the killers, as you see here. So they are really the best people there are. And they wouldn't have done this if it wasn't for the best. Okay? This is the message. Now, a very interesting thing is that in all the books, Israel is eliminating the Palestinians in order not to have another Auschwitz. This is very strong. The lesson from the Holocaust is that we should have a strong state with a strong army. And every massacre of Palestinians in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, it doesn't matter where, saves us from another Treblinka. This is the strongest message that the children get. If we don't do that, the Holocaust is around the corner. And the perpetrator of the Holocaust will not be the Germans, whom we love a lot, and we forgave them a long time ago. It will be the Palestinians. And this, of course, corresponds to the political discourse that compared Hitler to Arafat to Hitler and this and that. All right? So the students learn to legitimize the extermination or the elimination of Palestinians as something that is necessary, okay, and useful and blessed even to the state of Israel, to the existence to the state of the state of Israel. And the Holocaust is hovering all the time above all this. Thanks.
Is it working? Okay. So thank you for the work you have been carrying out for a long time, and we're looking forward to your next research, which will be truly interesting because it is going to focus on some issues linked to how the Holocaust is experienced. I'm going to give you a brief summary to tell you where we're going to stand. We're going to listen to Nello Rossi, whom we all know, and whom we hold in great esteem for the work he has done within the judiciary. And then Fausto Gianelli, from the democratic jurists, and he will be the discussant, after which we will have a presentation by Basso from the National unions, and then questions from the floor. So thank you. Nello Rossi, you have the floor. I've been working for the Permanent Tribunal of Peoples, and which deals with these issues. And many years ago, together with some colleagues, I see Marco Pivetti here, I was the author of one of the very few Italian books that deal with the legal mechanisms, the legal workings, the institutional workings of oppression and repression of the Palestinian people. This book was called Israel and Palestine, Rights and Justice, and it looked at politics, the politics of Israel vis-à-vis the Palestinians, and it looked into international law issues and human rights and the many mechanisms of domination and repression, and also the labor world, the criminal system. So these were magistrates who had visited Israel on several times and had met the president of the Supreme Court, and they had lively discussions and exchanges of ideas and opinions with them. Now, concerning this book, which, as I said, dates back to quite a few years ago, I have asked myself, and this is an issue that is being debated, there are undoubtedly some constant elements. There is the constant of oppression, occupation, and then the time occupation has lasted. So there is a constant in terms of repression. But there is also a new issue that was brought up this morning by Chantal Meloni, which is important from the legal standpoint and from the standpoint of international law and of the consequences that may derive from this. And that is whether we can actually speak about an apartheid regime in describing the situation in which the State of Israel keeps the Palestinians, or the various Palestinians, whom in our eyes make up the Palestinian people, but they are diversified with regard to the way they are treated from a legal standpoint, to their existential conditions. There are the Palestinians who live within the state, those who live in Jerusalem, the Palestinians who live in the Gaza territories and the West Bank, and the many Palestinians who are abroad or either in neighboring countries or in distant countries. So we might ask, does the apartheid issue is it worth being dealt with, and how should it be dealt with? Knowing that it is not enough, and we were discussing this yesterday at the press conference in preparation of today's conference, well, it's not enough to demonstrate that there is violence and oppression and cruelty to speak about apartheid, because apartheid, and today we received some input that clearly describes this, it is made of sophisticated mechanisms, cultural, functional mechanisms, segregation, discrimination, and differentiation. So this is an issue which deserves being explored, because people have started to look at this issue from this standpoint, and it is this is irritating for the Israeli authorities. But let us now go back to the constant of repression, which, for the fact that it has been going on for such a long time, it is worth being recalled. I would like to add something to what was said today, something that I included in my book. There is a mechanism of the removal of personal freedom, which is encroached upon, and it is done by Israel towards the Palestinians, which is administrative detention, which raises a number of problems in terms of the rule of law and of elementary rules and so on. Up until December this year, I was a magistrate in office, even though now I'm dealing with other things. In any case, administrative detention is a funny thing. It was introduced by the British in Palestine in 1948, and the first to have experienced this were the leaders of the Israeli structure, Golda Meir, Moshe Dayan, and at the time they protested very lively, energetically against all this, the deprivation of the freedom of an individual, against this institute, which was repealed in 1948, but then it was readopted, reintroduced by the Israelis in 1970 onwards, from the 1970s onwards, and they used it against the Palestinians. So it is an instrument which deprives a person of freedom as a preventive means, based on, well, without advertising or publicity, with proof that can be kept secret, because it is an administrative procedure which is as follows. You have been accused of being subversive, but you can't. They won't tell you where the evidence is, who says this, and upon expiry it can be renewed. It would last for 6 months, but then it can be renewed. So it is one of those mechanisms that, for someone who claims they promote the rule of law, and by adopting this type of measure, well, this is quite repugnant. With the Israelis pay very close attention to justifying all of their conducts, even from the legal standpoint, and so they are ready to say, yes, administrative detention is something that someone can appeal against. You can challenge it and go through to the various levels of the courts, through to the Supreme Court. But in practice, this is not so. So this and other mechanisms like confiscation, tearing down the houses, most of the things have already been said. However, there is a wide armamentarium of things, of mechanisms that constitute repression, that have been used and continue to be used. And they've been used for such a long time, at least 50 years. It started even prior to 50 years ago. Now, alongside all this, there is something new arising, something which goes beyond repression. Well, we can speak about apartheid both in common parlance, as being synonymous with discrimination, segregation, fragmentation, and domination by one ethnic group over another ethnic group. But then there are also the international rules that deal with this theme, this issue, and it tells us that there is a crime, the crime of apartheid, which is a crime against humanity. Chantal Meloni this morning reminded us that there was a report of the Economic and Social Commission for Eastern Asia that was submitted to the Secretary General of the United Nations, in which this issue is presented and clearly articulated, and that is the fact of being able to speak of a consolidated apartheid regime. But even prior to this, there were violations against international law, and there were elements of apartheid, and these had been pointed out at the final session of the Russell process on the 17th of March 2017. There had been a session of the Russell Court on Palestine, and on that occasion, a long list of violations of international law, of the various conventions, and also of the customary law, that is, the customs that are accepted at the international level. And so the Palestinian Wall was one such aspect, the legal regime that accompany, and the laws and so on that accompany the existence of this wall. and also prohibition for Palestinian refugees to go back to their homes, the systematic violation of the resolution on the withdrawal of Israel from the occupied territories, and then the annexation policy that has been put into practice as was described this morning. Well, all these things are violations of conventional and customary international law. But there are also violations of humanitarian international law. And this takes us back to the data concerning the settlements, the expropriation of Palestinian homes, administrative detention that I've just mentioned, and all of the systematic restrictions on movement, the freedom of movement, of going to school, of going to work, the freedom of health, that are all perpetrated by the Israelis. So today, we have major chapters of discrimination and fragmentation. Land policy, Israel has control over almost all the state territory, and therefore non-Jews cannot become owners of the land or use the land. Then there's demographic policy with two opposing laws: the law on the return of Jews, which is the law of non-return for the Palestinians, which poses strong limitations or even prevents the return of Palestinians who fled abroad. And then the fragmentation of the Palestinian people. I'll try to be concise because I don't want to take up too much time from the discussion that we're going to have. So apartheid is a crime in the light of international agreements. And when this accusation is formulated, the reactions are very strong by Israelis, because they realize that they can be discredited at the international level with regard to, and that they can have a greater scope for maneuver by using other forms of repression. And then there's a convention of the United Nations on the crime of apartheid, adopted in 1973, and it entered into force after a number of signatures and so on in 1976, and it defines apartheid as being a crime against humanity and identifies it as a serious threat to peace and international peace and security. Conducts. Well, many of the behaviors and conducts the Palestinians described as being of the Palestinians, and many of the policies that are adopted by Israel towards the Palestinians are amongst those that are indicated in the Convention on Apartheid. Let us think of arbitrary arrest and imprisonment, the severe attempts or attacks against physical and mental integrity in the light of the massacres that are being carried out systematically, and substantially the intention of imposing on an ethnic group, on the Palestinians, living conditions that are bound to lead to their destruction, to their annihilation and mortification. Many of the policies that were described here today, restriction of the freedom of gathering, of movement, of traveling abroad, of the right to work, and all of the various rights and education. Well, all of these policies are policies that have been defined as being apartheid. And through the systematic behaviors that the Anglo-Saxons called mens rea, that is, the psychological element of the crime of apartheid, are all present, because these conducts are implemented in view of establishing and maintaining the domination of one racial group over another. group of human beings or of oppressing the latter. This is the psychological element in the crime of apartheid. And the two fundamental elements are precisely this: the will of a permanent domination and oppression. This definition of apartheid, both with regard to conduct and to policies, but also from the standpoint of the psychological implications or the will, the willfulness and the malice, they were written into the Rome Statute of the International Penal Court, which it too speaks about systematic domination of one racial group over another. So if we bring together all of the things that we heard here today and all of the experiences we have heard of and the various things that have been shared with us with regard to the condition of the Palestinians, we can understand that there is a body of selective and targeted actions which, within a geographic area, provides for two types of rights: one for the dominating group and one for the other ethnic group, which is the oppressed group. And we therefore can realize that these two sets of rights, or these two laws, let's say, are the expression of apartheid. And the systematic use of this type of these actions over more than 50 years are the expression of the willfulness and the malice of this type of behavior. Many of us have wondered, what is the future? What can the future be? What can be done to counter this type of situation? Well, a first step forward is in intellectual clarity and in starting to understand, to speak about this crime, which is a severe crime, which works against equality and all of those things that were said this morning. There is a risk of creating an ethnic group, as Franco was saying, or Berg, who spoke of two different legal orders. And this is present in the representation of the real situation, and, well, it then becomes a stigma and a legal consideration. The international bodies, like the international tribunals, that should intervene in these themes, and they should therefore be called upon to not to go on being silent. They should be involved. I recently went to Malaysia for a session of the Standing Tribunal of Peoples on the case of the Rohingyas. Well, I realized one thing: this situation is truly dramatic, but it was also the first genocide that occurred at the time of the internet. This is something that had never occurred. That is the possibility of providing documents and visual images of what happens. This represents a quantum leap, because many of these oppressive policies, crimes and violations have always been possible because of the silence around them. In Srebrenica, at that time, there was a sanitary or health cordon, and many people could say that they didn't know about those massacres. But only after a few decades, and a few decades after the Holocaust, we can still hear people saying, I didn't know anything about what was going on. Well, at the time of the internet, at a time when each person can take pictures and so on, then it is easier to bring these people to justice. So, with regard to initiatives in this area, in order to create minimum conditions of equality in Israel and of respect for the rule of law, well, all of these things are going to run into huge difficulties because of the things we've heard here today. I hope that the democratic public opinion in Israel may realize that on the other plate of the scale, there is a huge damage for Israel, because from this situation, it is impossible that there shouldn't be a negative effect. It is paradoxical because as we speak about apartheid, people who are throughout the history of Europe experienced living in a ghetto. It is absurd that this very same people should impose this on another people. So the Democrats should take action, and no matter how weak the voice of the Standing Tribunal of Peoples, no matter how weak its voice may be, it should do something. It should dedicate a session on this issue and take action so that this issue may be brought to the attention of the people across the world and of Italians in our case. Make the issue known to as many people as possible. Well, thank you, Nello Rossi, for having dealt with this issue in such an exhaustive manner.
In the language of Israeli and Palestinian and international activists, apartheid is a language which is well known since President Carter was attacked because of his rallying with Israel. You gave us some very interesting insight in that, because this is something that we should clearly understand and in a more articulate manner. So you gave us some very interesting hints as to what we can do to pursue this effort. Well, we need intellectual clarity, and you have helped us a great deal along these lines. I'd like to call upon Fausto Giannelli from the Democratic Jurists. Thank you for your invitation and the opportunity have been given today. I've taken note of what was said during the morning and in the afternoon, because I've had the opportunity of taking notes about these very interesting presentations, and I've jotted down a few questions which I'd like to elaborate upon as a contribution to the debate, both in line with what I heard this morning and in the afternoon. I sort of asked myself, what is it that we can do faced with the problem of the unsolved problem of the Palestinian-Israeli question, which we have tried to look at from within the Israeli society. Before asking ourselves how the Israeli state acts in contact with the Palestinian reality in the occupied territories, I would take as a starting point what Avraham Burg said. He said, well, we've got to take as a starting point the reality, the factual reality, the two-state solution, which is being over and over mentioned as a mantra, which is the logical solution, and which is even mentioned in UN resolutions with sort of hypothetical green line. Well, this sort of solution whereby you would divide the two states, Israel and Palestine, by means of a green line. Well, the two states do not exist now, but in the future there might be sort of a future that we will have to build ourselves, which is a transitional future, this transitional phase that we are willing to accept, considering that there might be a final sort of step towards the establishment of the two states that can coexist peacefully. I think that the time has basically done away with such a possibility. We have to be very realistic in our approach. A two-state solution, which was never really advocated within Israel, is less and less feasible today, as we were discussing sort of about the peace process, which Avraham Burg defined as a mental state. The solid facts on the ground were being changed to make it impossible and not. So if that solution is not possible, then we will have to look at it, an alternative solution, as a single state where the two peoples, the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, might coexist peacefully. And I'd like to take up this suggestion, which is of great interest and provides a new paradigm. But there is a problem which is connected with this solution. Well, this single state already exists. You have a situation of a state that controls a territory, has a military political sovereignty on it, but this state, which exists today and will continue to exist for a long time, it's a state that has some specific traits and characteristics with 2 areas of democracy, diversified democracy, full democracy within Israel. And we'll see that that is not entirely true. Some claim this is what happens within Israel. You have this twofold petition. Well, in Israel, you have a serene democracy, which is the paradise of human rights. Well, and then there is another sort of situation where sort of Israel is a different sort of democracy, quote unquote. So we have 2 spheres of democracy on the territory of Israel, which are not clearly explained. And there is a position which was advocated by some important leading Israeli jurists, the president of the Supreme Court. Well, it's something which is not convincing to me. We have Israeli citizens, non-Jewish Israeli citizens that find themselves in a very different situation. So within Israel, we have a different kind of democracy. I've attended a meeting convened by Gideon Levy and said we have 3 kinds of democratic regime: full democracy for the Jewish citizens, and reduced democracy for non-Jewish citizens of Israel, and a regime of military occupation in the West Bank. These 3 spheres of democracy raise a major problem in that the situation tends to further grow. Mention was made earlier on by education and culture. And I'd like to sort of link this up with what Rivlin, the head of the Israeli state, has said. I'm worried because there are 4 tribes coexisting in Israel. On the basis of the educational system, you have 20% Arab schools, then lay Jews, Orthodox Jews, and religious Jews. These 4 tribes do not communicate with each other, do not enter into a dialogue. They don't have the sort of the service, the military service as a common ground, because the ultra-Orthodox Jews do not serve in the army. So this is a real problem. So when we talk about Israel as a single state, that does not correspond to the truth, to the reality on the ground. So I'd like to focus on one problem, which is the #1 problem in my view. And it's like the original sin. We sort of take for granted that Israel was a democratic state and a Jewish state. This is something which is being accepted in Israel, but we, as we look at it from outside, we would never accept it. Who would accept it? France defines itself as a democratic and Christian state, or Italy would do the same. So to define the Israeli state as a democratic and a Jewish state raises a number of problems, which we would look into, we would have to look into more comprehensively. To think that you are a Jewish and democratic state, and thinking that the Jewish identity is a constituent element of the state is wrong, because you would have people that that somehow looks like a beginning of apartheid. And then there is a second point whereby Israel claims that is in a country which is operating under emergency situation. Since it was established, Israel felt that they were sort of living in an emergency situation, and Israel signed some international conventions, such as the Pact for Civil and Political Rights in 1966. It signs this pact, but then it requests for derogation, indicating that it will suspend its implementation because Israel lives in a state, in an emergency state, so it doesn't implement this Convention on Fundamental political and human rights. So the question is not so much that Israel lives in a state of emergency, but it claims that it is an exceptional state, and therefore claims it should operate under exceptional conditions. So people say, why schools do create this kind of young people that feel that way? But there was a poll that was published by the Israeli papers. In a poll which was undertaken in Israel, most Israeli Jews felt that they were sort of in favor of Israeli Jews as opposed to Arab Jews, so based on religious and ethnic identity. This was higher in the more orthodox Haredim that were in favor of expelling non-Jewish Israeli citizens. And then there was another sort of poll, which was really appalling when it comes to the results of the poll. Well, I think we have to consider very carefully these results. Now, if most Jews, 59% says that they would be in favor of the fact that it be a legal preference for a positive discrimination for Jews, if 49% says that the government has got to consider first Jewish citizens and non-Jewish citizens, we should ask ourselves, where do we live? Well, Gideon Levi says, what has become of Israel as a state? I would ask rather a different question. What was the definition that Israel gave of its state? Is there a sort of a conflict when you say that Israel is a democratic state that belongs to all its citizens and allows for equal representation and political dignity to all its citizens, and a state which defines itself as a Jewish state, which is clearly based on principles of identity, granting more rights to its own citizens? And we're still talking about Israel itself rather than the West Bank or Gaza. So this is a fundamental different political rights between Jews and non-Jews. And this discrimination that jurists said is not a discrimination against Israeli Arabs, but to favor Israeli Jews. So, and this is the wrong way of considering the question. At this stage, we do have to face a key problem. When we envisage sort of a single state with two nations, we'll have to consider whether this state will continue to define itself as a Jewish state, and we should ask ourselves what are the rights that will be granted to people that are not Jewish and live in that state. So we have to ensure that there is a proper protection of individual fundamental rights. So the discrimination does raise a problem in terms of how do we look at the Israeli state. And this raises a problem for us as well, because the rights are interconnected all over the world. You can't have an a medical experiment which is confined to a single laboratory. The elimination of rights under the guise of legal justifications have a characteristics. They may be confined to one area. Administrative detention, which was mentioned by Nello Rossi, has been largely applied elsewhere. So this idea of a society which is based on military control, discrimination on the basis of ethnic or religious principles are notions and concepts that will be exported elsewhere in the world. And Israel appears as a paradigm of a democracy which is at war. So in the future, we might turn out to be democracies which are at war and threatened. Civic militarism, is it compatible with democracy? The Romans that invented the modern law felt that the armies should be outside should camp outside the civil boundaries of the cities. So they made a distinction between the civilian area and the military area. But now Israel makes this an important characteristic in terms of identity. You have people that their specific impact on the life of citizens as a result of this. So we should ask ourselves what sort of a democracy we have in mind when it comes to Israel and other countries. For too long have we considered that democracy is a place where the democratically elected majority decides everything. So Norberto Bobbio used to say, and he was a leading democratic jurist, democracy is not a system where majorities are the ones that make the decision, but where minorities are guaranteed. Israel is the place where the Jewish majority makes the decision. What would happen if in Italy we were to decide that a minority would have fewer rights? It would no longer be a democracy. Democracy is a system which protects the rights of minorities. I think that this raises a problem in terms of the actual authentic democracy of the Israeli society. The 20% of Israel, which is a minority and which is excluded from politics and must remain a minority because it's not a Jewish part of the population, has to do with how we define democracy in the new millennium. Legal universalism is not something confined to Israel, but the rules might be sort of applied elsewhere. So we would convert the democracy as Plato would say that democracy is demo, people, and then power. So, and kratos is violence. Democracy is the violence of the majority which prevails on the minority. And he felt that there was an appalling system. We had for years considered substantial democracy as a democracy which would consider first and foremost the rights of the minorities. If instead it's the democracy only provides for a minor role for the minorities, we track back with respect to our own view of democracy. So it's most urgent for us to discuss about democracy in Israel, but elsewhere as well, because I think that democracy is threatened in Europe, in Italy, elsewhere as well. When we see that minorities are not integrated, there is a risk of conflict which might break out. I'd like to close with a quote from a liberal democratic jurist, Alan Dershowitz, a well-known lawyer, who said, as a liberal, I feel that the future of democracy, which is threatened by terrorism and war, is a democracy which rethinks itself, must accept the possibility of torture. He says he's in favor of torture for the sake of the protection of democratic majorities. And he comes up with a number of paradoxical ideas which somehow appalls us. We should take democracy of Israel, which is at war and is fighting against the terrorism, because this is a possible future. I think that this is a possible, very negative future which we might have to grapple with.
Well, Father Giannelli's warning is also addressed to Italy, and the issue of democracy has been fought since millions of people took to the streets to say no to war, and also our country went to war, so there's a lot to do about this. However, with regard to the state of Israel, the Jewish state and democracy are a contradiction. But the problem is that in this stage of affairs in Israel, most of the ministers, most of whom are settlers, claim that they are perfectly willing, and I'm sure that they're willing to sacrifice democracy because the Jewish state comes before anything else. So we are at a stage where what you were saying is implemented. So, and it's it is no coincidence that what is asked of the PLO and the Palestinian Authority is to recognize the Jewish state. If they don't recognize the Jewish state, they're going to go ahead. So this is a major problem for democracy and above all in Palestine and Israel. So thank you. But before the questions, I would like to greet with great joy and with great thankfulness Silvana and Michelangelo Frammartino. Today we spoke about his son. They're not only his parents, but they're extraordinary people who have used their pain, their grief, to put it to good and draw teachings from it. And they created this foundation, the Frammartino Foundation, that continues to work for human rights, and not only in Palestine. So thank you. I think that we really owe you a lot, because you teach us a lot about life. So thank you, Tiziana. At this point, we can open the discussion. You have to use the microphone, thank you.
Basso. Sergio.
Sergio Passoli. I have two hats when I'm here. One is that of being a representative of CGIL, the national trade union, left-wing trade union. I have worked with the trade unions of the Middle East, and then the House of Peace, because I too am one of the volunteers who work here at this house and the foundation, the Frammartino Foundation. But having said this, I would like to address two questions to our guests, seeking to go in the direction of people who are engaged in civil society, what needs to be done, what sort of contribution can be given to the political, peaceful, non-violent and just solution to this conflict. So two questions. One is this, and I would like to consider labor as a point of reference. Well, I think that we all agree on the fact that after 70 years, we can say that politics and the institutions have failed to comply with international law and comply with the conventions and resolutions of the United Nations. If it were the opposite, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here to discuss about these issues. So, given the fact that there is this weakness of the institutional framework, we need to invent other solutions to identify a solution that is sustainable and that has respect for the self-determination of peoples that is recognized by the United Nations and international law. Now, in your view, labor, and I'm asking Avram and Norith and Jafar, our friend from Bethlehem has left, but the other guests who are here, could labor be a path that can help us build up relationships between these two communities, at least those sections of the communities that want peace? labor as a system, labor between Palestine and Israel. Well, just a few data to understand what we're talking about. 56,000 Palestinians regularly go to work to Israel in conditions of exploitation without any form of protection. 80,000 Palestinians go to work in Israel in an irregular manner, and 30,000 are illegal workers in the settlements, in the occupations. Another 20,000 Palestinians work along the Jordan Valley on the farms, and most of these people are minors. In Jerusalem, more than half of the Palestinian population works they work for companies from the West. So there is an integration which is full of exploitation and which isn't regular at all, that could be transformed into an area for mutual engagement for both male and female workers on both sides. Do you think that this could be an avenue that could be useful? So you would begin with the right to dignified labor. Could this be a contribution for building up between the two communities something in common that could be a precursor for a peaceful coexistence? Another question has to do with the peace movement by since Time for Peace through to the present day, have fought to make sure that there would be a peace process that would eventually lead to coexistence and a just peace between Israelis and Palestinians. In the 90s, through to the year 2000 and beyond, through thousands of difficulties, we have taken action in the area of peace to make sure that the Oslo Agreement or Oslo Pact would be implemented. There was a common project, namely the Oslo Agreements, whether we like them or not. That is what we had. And on that project and on other peace initiatives, the movement for peace involving Palestinians and Israelis, we did things, we moved, we started doing things. From the year 2000 onwards, we ran into huge difficulties, and I would say that the movement for peace, both in Israel and Palestine, and at the international level, with regard to this theme, went into a stalemate. There is no action from civil society for peace that can be called this name. Probably what is missing is what I said earlier, that is a joint project, something that we can work on together, an action for peace that should bring together the Israelis and Palestinians on something. What could that something be? Well, very likely, there isn't a broad consensus. There aren't any forces or groups in civil society that can promote this. And because what is missing is a direction in which to go. So this is the question that I address to my Israeli friends. In your opinion, is it possible? Well, this morning, Abraham in particular made some proposals that were visionary in a positive, with a positive meaning. In order to build peace, you need to have a vision. Well, is it possible to build a joint project? I'm not interested in 1, 2, 3, 4 states. I mean, we have one state and we have huge problems, but Israelis and Palestinians don't. The issue isn't the number of states, but is there a common project, a joint project that they can work on? Can we work out a coalition? Can the forces of civil society come together, and what are the what is civil society like in Israel? Because without these elements, it is truly difficult for the international community to do anything. Well, thank you, Sergio. I left you all that time, not for your question, but I would like to ask the others to be more concise. But Sergio wanted to give a presentation, but it wasn't possible to give him time, so that is why I gave him so much time.